We have such a sickness in this culture where we want to cut off the hard parts and just revel in the superficial gloss. And it's such a dastardly lie to tell people that they can live their lives that way, because it cuts us off from everything that's genuine and everything that can like profoundly have meaning and touch us and shape us and evolve us.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Medicine Stories podcast. I am your host, Amber Hill. Today's episode has been in the works for years. Like many of you, I'm sure I've been following Tara at Slowdown Farmstead on Instagram for many years. And once she moved over to Substack, I moved over as well. She's still on Instagram. And about 4 years ago now, when I first heard that her youngest daughter had died at age 18, I was just shocked. It was so surprising, so awful. And then as the story started to piece together, and then once Tara really shared the story, it was just a whole nother level of disbelief at what transpired, and awe and respect for the way Tara held the story and her daughter's life, the life of their family, Tara's husband and Mila's two older sisters as well. They've since added a grandchild, a granddaughter also. And so I am honored to present to you this interview today in which Tara tells more of the story, tells the story as it can only be told through speaking it instead of writing it. Thank you. Thank you for listening. And thank you so much, Tara, for trusting me and my listeners with Mila's story. I have also been wanting to talk about what is related to this story, which is cannabis-induced psychosis. For years, I've had quite a bit of conversations in my Instagram stories about this subject over the years. I've, as I tell Tara in the interview, known 3 teenage girls to also experience psychosis from smoking weed. And actually, I just remembered a 4th in high school. One of my best friends had an episode on Halloween night after hitting a blunt, which she had done plenty of times before. But, you know, it's a cumulative thing, I've noticed. And that's very much true in this story. I would love you to check out the story I've linked below from Tablet online called How Weed Became the New Oxycontin. Big Pharma and Big Tobacco are helping market high-potency, psychosis-inducing THC products as your mother's medical marijuana. I think that title and subtitle really says it all, and that article was extremely eye-opening for me, helped me make sense of the stories I had heard and seen up close and personally. And I very much feel strongly that I want more people, more mothers, more teens to understand the risks of the new cannabis. Because it's not your mother's medical marijuana. It's a whole different substance. Tara and I have recorded a bonus conversation for Patreon supporters of the podcast. Thank you so much for making it possible. Thank you so much. I couldn't do it without the support there. You can hear Tara and I touch on this a little bit in the episode, and then we decided, to make room for Mila's story within the main interview and take this conversation on food and nourishment and how our understanding of nourishment has changed over the years, the different diet dogmas we've both been caught up in, over to Patreon. So that conversation is about what we want our daughters to know, women, restriction, chronic illness, and more on Tara's metabolic journey. Tara is in her mid 50s now. I'm in my mid 40s, and I have always thought of Tara, as I know so many have, as like this paragon of health and, ancestral eating, nutrient dense eating, living on a farm and raising all of her own animals and butchering them alongside her husband. And turns out she had a metabolic crash recently, despite doing all those things right. So we thought for all these years. So that conversation is over there at patreon.com/medicine stories. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you, Tara, for sharing this beautiful story. And thank you to everyone who's going to listen to it and hold it with reverence, love, and respect for Mila and for her family. Tara, after years of batting about the idea, we're finally talking. Thank you so much for coming on Medicine Stories.
It is an honor to be here, Amber. I'm so glad to be sitting across from you and getting some of your time and just being in your circle as much as we can be over a screen. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I was, of course, reviewing your Substack before we talked today and had a thought that I've had many times, which is that it's one of the most dynamic and community engaged Substacks I've seen, especially for its size. I mean, it's a decent size. I think you have 26,000 subscribers, but you get the same engagement level as other ones I follow with 1 million subscribers. Your people are so moved by your writing and by your life, and that includes me. I would say you have, for a long time, been one of the most inspirational women on social media, and not just speaking for myself, but speaking for the hundreds or thousands of comments that I've read under your writings and your shares over the years. So let's start with the book that you have coming out. I was really especially curious about the subtitle. So the title is Radiance of the Ordinary, and I will ask you to explain that to us. But essays on life, death, and the sinews that bind. Tell me about your choice of the word sinew.
Well, that was a collaboration with the publisher. And I think initially the word was ties that bind. And it didn't quite encapsulate well so much of what my book sort of revolves around, which is the raw sort of grit of life and how those things, it's messy and it involves death, but it's also powerful and beautiful. And I speak, about life and death, and I speak about it through how I came to find peace around death. I was a child that was maybe overly consumed about death. I was very fearful of it. It controlled a lot of the things that I did and the way that I thought. About the worries that I held in my heart. And that went up until I was a teenager. I used to be convinced I'd die by the time I was 18. And, just like too much around death. And it was through death. It was through my first animal harvest, actually, with my mentor, Richard, who was a cattleman in Alberta, that I came to find an incredible peace around death. And so it was through that act of participation and sort of facing and walking into that realm, which was a really big thing for me. I had a background of veganism. I had a real, not only because of that fear of death, but also my just absolute love of animals. And, I sort of had my world cracked open by that man, by Richard, my friend. And he was one of the most, or maybe the most connected, and he had this genuine deep adoration of the natural world that I've not seen really to that in that way, in such an honest and raw and unpretentious, simple, common sense, being a part of it kind of way. He wouldn't wax poetic. He couldn't sit down and write a poem about it, but he really was the real deal. And it was just, I guess, in that, and something I tried to explain in my book is like in that blood, in that sinew, in that warmth of a body that was once animated and alive and is now gone. It's like what happens between those two places. And I don't want to make it seem like the book is just about butchering animals. It's not at all. But that was my initial sort of consecration into this new world of understanding that death was actually profoundly beautiful, and that there was, without a doubt in my mind, um, a transference of our physical embodiment into the spiritual. And I know because it passed right through me and all around me, and I was a part of that. And it was the most life-changing experience I had ever had. And it set the stage for the rest of my adult life and what I decided I was going to do and how I wanted to live and what was important to me, all came through that profound moment. So um, that's my long answer for the sinews. that bind.
I love it. I had no idea what your answer was going to be, but I'm not surprised that you and I, within minutes, are talking about death. It's a subject that neither of us has shied away from. And Tara, I was the same way as a child. And especially as a teenager, like really kind of fixated on trying to understand death. And then also I would have moments of like abject terror and being positive that the people I loved were going to, that every time the phone rang, it was going to be bad news. And I was worried since I was very young that my mom was going to die in a car accident driving home from work, which is what ended up happening when I was 34 years old. And it's interesting as well to hear that you had a vegan background. I'm curious about like your evolution with food and, how an understanding of death ties into that. But also when I read the subtitle, The Sinews That Bind, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. They took this really common phrase, the ties that bind, but put sinews in there. And I know that I first saw photos of animal harvests on your Instagram page many years ago, and it was hard to look at. As also a former vegetarian, when I became vegetarian when I was 12 and then vegan at 17. And a big part of that was I didn't even like to look at raw meat. Let alone look at an image of an animal strung up, skinned, being butchered, and then realizing like you and your husband are doing this yourselves to your animals who you raised and who you loved and had close relationship with. And difficult as it was for me to like take in at the time, I stuck with it. I stuck with you. I continued reading all your posts on the harvesting, and I couldn't even harvest my own chickens when it came time to do it. I let Susie step in and do it with Owen. And maybe I would have gotten there, but we stopped keeping chickens. But I love how you use the word sinews. It's so perfect for you, who also writes so beautifully about, the connections between things. I like how you're saying that your mentor wouldn't have like put these basic life and death things that were just his reality into poetic language, but now here you are doing it and bringing that to the world.
Thank you. I feel a great sense of indebtedness to him. I really miss him. He was my best friend, and he died of cancer. And even in his death, he taught me and continues to teach me. And his wife, Kathy, was just so committed when he died of cancer to honor him in his death. And they had his body there in his bed, and the room was full of beeswax candles. And she had called me when he had died, and we flew back to Alberta from where we live. And I remember even then I couldn't go in the room initially. Um, I was scared to see him dead, and I went to him and I just sat down on the floor beside him and I put my hand on his chest and I was like, "Oh, you're still here. Okay." He was still there, and the house was full of people, and people would come and go and spend some time there with him and talk to him, and there was these big pillar beeswax candles burning all around him, and I I spoke to him, and the next day they took a buffalo robe because he raised bison. He had eight or 10,000 acres of wild prairie grasslands, and his bison roamed as free as they can in this world today. We would drive for an hour to go and find them. They would just be out on the prairie, like you could imagine how they, were in tens of thousands, decades, or a century ago. But um, they took a bison hide and they put his body on it, and the men carried him through his fields to this place they call the Rock, which is just one huge boulder plunked in the middle of this prairie. Just, where it came from, I don't know. And they brought his body there, and they played. He was very much aligned with the First Nations of our country, and they played drums for him, and we sang, and we all went up to his body, and we left something with his body when we said goodbye. And um, I had left one of the horns from the first bison harvest that we had done together. So I still have one, and I left him the other. And when they burned his body, he was burned with all the treasures that people had brought as offerings to him. And I remember, we did this whole ceremony and we were singing and everyone was crying openly. We're out on this prairie, and everyone was just so in love with him. He was just such a lovely person. And when we went back and they carried his body back and they brought him back to his bed. And the next day he was to be cremated, but they brought him back. And later that we all talked and cried and hugged and ate together. And I went into his room to go say goodbye. And I went in and I said, "Oh, you're not here anymore." It was so profoundly different. His body was there, but he wasn't there. And just then his daughter came out and she said to her sister, "Dad's not here anymore. He's gone." And I just, we, death can be so beautiful in that way. I mean, it's heart wrenching and devastating, but it is also like such a promise. It's such a promise of where of our magnificence and our greatness and our expansion. Like it's not an end. And you said you were afraid of death as well when you were a child, and I was the same as you. I remember at night when my mom would go out, I would open my window a crack and listen for her high heels coming up the sidewalk, and I could not go to sleep until I heard her shoes coming up, because I had said, like, when I hear her shoes, she's still alive. She's still here. And I guess that was as good as I could come up with at 8 years old, but anyway, I'm just saying that I resonate with exactly where you were from. And so to have such a profound altering from that experience, I think really speaks to the truth in it, because I don't think you can go through something like that and witness something like that, be a part of something like that, and come away from it untouched. I think the honesty in any experience like that is how profoundly it affects your life moving forward. And that most definitely did.
Mm-hmm. So how then did you go from being that afraid as a young child of death, which I think there is like a small subset of children who are like that. I saw a video on Instagram just a few days ago. It was like really cute. It was like a 3-year-old girl with her baby sibling. And she was crying. It seemed like it was like she was overtired. It was probably past bedtime. And she's like, I don't want him to grow up. He's so cute. And
Oh,
I don't want to die when I'm 100. And I was
oh,
just like, oh my God, I was just like this little girl, like really keenly aware of the passage of time and the temporary nature of everything and death from a really young age. But I read the comments, and most people are like, why is this little girl thinking about this kind of thing? What kind of kid is this? And there's
mm,
one or two comments of people being like, I was just like her when I was little. And I was like,
uh,
there's a few of us out.
yeah.
And like my youngest is like that, and my oldest wasn't. My youngest is always like, Mom, what even is life? Like, what was the beginning of time? Asking
Mm,
those kind of questions.
yeah.
Um, so when did you decide to become vegan? What was your reasons for that? And then
Mm.
was your first harvest difficult?
Oh my God, it was terrifying. But as far as the vegan stuff, so actually, I had my first daughter when I was 21. That was my daughter Tyra, who's now 31. Um, and she, um, no, she's 32 actually. That's bad. I should have remembered that. But when she was born, do you know, so back then they did a PKU test. They did this series of tests on babies and they came back and they said, something's wrong. She was a 9-pound baby,
Is that the
really healthy.
heel prick blood
Yeah,
test?
it's the heel prick. Exactly. And my husband was in the military, so we were moving from base to base. And I ended up at some doctor in Ontario, and they said, "Yeah, we need to redo this test because there's some really weird things showing up. Her ammonia levels are really high." So, I'll skip through the whole saga, but it ended up being about a year and a half long thing where she ended up getting referred to these children's specialists. They diagnosed her with this disease called OTC, which is literally a sentence long, but what it is essentially is a genetic disease. I think 4 people in Canada have it. And it is about the body's inability to break down proteins. And so ammonia builds up, because when we break down, it's because they aren't able to utilize arginine, which breaks down ammonia in the body. So in little boys, it's fatal. And in little girls, they go blind and mentally retarded. And so I was going to these top geneticists and she was getting blood tests taken. She was just a little baby, and we got sucked up into that whole like medicalized world. And like I said, we go maybe every 6 weeks. They do another blood test to monitor that things weren't getting higher. We sat down with geneticists, and everyone kind of scratched their head and weren't sure why and what was going on. And meanwhile, I have this baby who's off the charts on her growth rate, is like, just got this big mop of black hair and brown eyes and is so robust and like rough and tumble and like just always ready to go and sharp and ahead of the curve with like all of her developmental. And they keep telling me that she's going to be blind and mentally retarded. Like, when is this going to happen? Oh, we don't know. It could happen in a month from now. And it was horrible. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, a kid myself. And so I was like, okay, well, if they explain to me that her body can't break down protein, I'm thinking, well, then maybe I shouldn't be eating so much protein because I'm like breastfeeding her. And at the time, I cooked all my own food, but I wasn't buying organic food or, I'd have milk and bread and strawberries and whatever, like, but I wasn't on any sort of, I just didn't eat junk food. And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't be eating so much protein. And it seemed to make sense to me, like, so that's what I did. And I actually went to a bookstore because there was no internet then, and I got some books. I should just back up a little bit and say that daughter had a very severe reaction to her first set of vaccinations. And so she was never vaccinated again. So I was well acquainted with this real hippie 70s incense, like granola bookstore that was like in Ottawa, a couple hours from where we were living. And I had gone there when the doctor told a doctor actually told me not to vaccinate my child again. And I thought he was out to lunch. I thought he was nuts. I thought she would die. And so I had gone to this bookstore and got some books out on vaccination. And so that was my introduction into this vaccination world. And I read the books that I could get. And I signed up for the NVIC newsletter that came photocopied in the mail back then. And Mothering Magazine was like my godsend back then. That was when it was still a really great magazine, and the classifieds. like, and so those things, that's all I knew. I had no one around me. Like that, no one talked about stuff like that. But that same bookstore, because I had that experience, I then, knew about this bookstore. I went there. I got some books on like veganism. And I think it's probably everyone shares the same story from there, right? Like you start reading it. Oh my God, this is horrible what they're doing. And oh, this is crazy. And I'm actually like killing myself by eating meat, and saturated fat is going to kill me. And so I was just like, this is the way to go. And the big thing then was the diamonds. Did you ever read the Food Combining Fit for Life or Food for Life or something like that?
Remember it. I remember like the posters.
Oh, yeah, Harvey Diamond and his wife, she had big blonde hair, like Texas style, big blonde hair. And so we started doing that. I was like food combining. I was living in, the northern tundra of Canada and like eating fruit for breakfast only. And I lost all the muscle on my body. Like I was emaciated. I was getting sick all the time, all that sort of stuff. So it wasn't too long lasting, but I did it because of that. And just to tie up that story, after 18 months of blood tests, blah, 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 I got a call one day and they said, you have to come back. The last blood test was wrong. I went back and they did the blood test again. They said, okay, it wasn't wrong. She just doesn't have this. And that was it. So I don't know that she ever had it. She may have just been, maybe her ammonia levels were a little bit higher. She never showed any physical manifestation, but those two things, both those tests and seeing the best of the doctors here, and then the vaccination stuff really set the stage for how I thought about Western medicine after that and how I approach that throughout all of my children's lives and ours. Yeah.
And then I remember when I first found you, you were on the Weston A. Price Foundation podcast, and you had at some point then found them and this more traditional way of eating. I'm curious, because if your story is like mine, where I had been vegetarian or vegan for a long time, 14 years, when my teacher, Cammie McBride, sat me down during lunch at one of our classes when I was a nursing mom. And she said, "You're vegan, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I can tell by looking at you. And I never do this, but I feel like I have to say something because I can tell you're really unwell and you need more nutrients in order to support your lactating body and your baby." And I drank it up because I knew she was right. I'm just forever grateful for her for doing that for me in that moment. And then within a couple months, I was full Weston A. Price, doing the bone broths, eating liver, and it did feel good. And now just within the last year or so, as I've started food tracking because I had a complete metabolic crash and could barely get out of bed for a while, I realized I was really overeating fat. And that partially came from the keto movement, of 6 or 7 years ago, and certain influencers in that movement. But really going farther back to like early-ish days of the internet, it came from Weston A. Price and Sally Fallon and Finding Nourishing Traditions. And so, yeah, I'm curious how you went from veganism to eating meat, and more than meat, like the whole animal that you actually grow and harvest yourself, and then where you're at now with like Weston A. Price.
Mm-hmm. So for us, I actually met this while I was still in that same town on that military base. I think it wasn't as long as you were doing it. I actually met this German guy whose parents owned this organic sourdough bakery in the little town next to us, and he was a naturopath from Germany. So him and I just became friends. I would go there and buy little things now and then, homeopathics, that sort of stuff. And he said, you know, you should go see this woman. Who was another German woman, and talk to her, because I was constantly getting bladder infections, and I had never had bladder infections in my life. I was getting yeast infections, and I had not had that problem before. I was sick all the time, so I'm buying like herbs and stuff from him, and he's like, "Look, the herbs is not your problem, you know." So I went and spoke to this woman, and she just sat down with me and asked me what I was eating. She said, well, here's what you need to eat. If you want to get better, here's what you need to eat. You need to be eating this sourdough spelt bread. You need to be eating eggs in the morning. You need eating bacon again. And you need to be like, you know, and I thought she was just a batshit crazy. I was like, oh, woman, you're so from another decade. You don't know what you're talking about. But I got sicker and sicker. And I ended up just doing what she told me to do. And it was like, okay, like I just felt so much better that there was no going back for me. So I just started slowly eating more conventional. But yes, when I found, so my mom was a big health nut when we were growing up. I should say that she never let us have sugar in the house. We had, like, you know, what was health food then, you know, whole wheat bread, and all my friends had white bread, and I always was so jealous of them because they had white bread in their lunches, and I had an apple and whole wheat bread and peanut butter that had nuts in it. It really made me angry. You know, I didn't get Skippy bread and that sort of thing. But anyway, so I think I had a foundation of knowing eating well. We didn't get fast food, we didn't get chips, we didn't get cereal. I just didn't get pop, never anything like that. And so I continued to eat that way. Now, after I saw that woman, I started eating. I met a farmer. I got eggs from him. I was getting my bread from there. There was no, you know, that little health food store in Ottawa. Sometimes we'd go there and they'd have like a little basket of apples that were organic. And I'm like, what's organic? I mean, it just wasn't really much of a thing. And so, but eventually, yes, I became aware of Weston A. Price, and like you, I think I spent maybe too long eating a really high fat diet, a really low carbohydrate diet. I would say I've spent close to 3 decades eating a low carbohydrate diet of some version or another, to be honest. And it all was fine and good. When I could run on my stress hormones, it worked beautifully. I could get things done like nobody's business. And then, you know, in my late 40s, um, the stress hormones didn't feel so hot anymore. They weren't working the way they were supposed to. And I was like, why am I so exhausted? I should say a little bit before that, I got chronic Lyme. And I wonder now, like, you know, maybe I had Lyme issues all along. And this was just the trigger that allowed the symptoms of the Lyme to manifest in ways like, just like people with mold illness, or, you know, because when you're tested for Lyme, it's just saying your body's been exposed to it at some point. I was in the military when I was young. It might have just, and I had ticks on me all the time. It could have even been from them then. Like I'm just not so sure that all of these autoimmune type chronic diseases are things our bodies wouldn't be able to maybe handle. I'll speak for myself specifically. Maybe I had that for a long time, and my body was able to handle it while I was well. But when I got sick and I crashed, it was miserable. Like, we were living on our first farm then, and we were selling our meat and eggs and produce, and we were just hustling all the time till 11 or 12 at night, like trying to get things done. And I got sick and I was literally bedridden. We went to go see a specialist in the US because my Lyme, no one could do anything for me here. We spent thousands upon thousands of dollars, and I still had to like get up and go do chores. And I remember like just walking from the house to the barn and crying, like just thinking this is the hardest thing. Like I felt like I was moving through tar all the time. And you know, at that time, if you had looked at my diet, I was eating brilliantly. There's no one could have picked out anything in my diet. You know, I was eating all the good fats. I was eating all of the farm food. I was, you know, drinking the raw milk. I was doing all the thing. And I was just, my body was just on fire. My mind was on fire. And it was really scary, actually. It's really scary. And I'm sure you know that feeling of you almost feel trapped inside of something and you have no idea if you're ever going to get better again. And that's what's so scary because you just have not had that experience before. You don't have anything to draw on to be like, oh, yeah, you know, I remember when I completely crashed 10 years ago and I got it together. It's a completely new world with uncharted waters. And um, so, yeah, I totally agree with you as far as, you know, that whole, well, the fat will be the energy. And I think maybe that's true for a time. And you can get by, and it's amazing what our bodies can do if they have to do it, but it doesn't mean that it's, that's the big thing I've learned. It doesn't mean it's the ideal way to live. Um, and so this whole, you know, where I've been similar, I think, to you as far as, you know, trying to actually find an authentic way of being, an authentic sort of health, like well-being, like a solid um, nourishment of ourselves. Uh, it's really new for me, to be honest, which seems crazy because I was a nutritionist. I've always been in nutrition. I've always been in this world in some way or another. I've always been interested in it. And yet here I am, like 54 years old, and I'm learning how to nourish myself in profound ways. And it's really challenging. And I think a lot of times, even still, like a couple days ago, I was talking to one of my daughters, to Ella, and I was saying, you know, there's still moments that come up and I'll just get frustrated because it's so slow. And I'm like, I know how to make this go quicker. I know what I need to do to make this go quicker. I'm going to start eating low carb. And she's like, to what end, mom? There's no end in that. And of course, like that's absolutely true. And I'm not going to go back there because I know there is no answer in that world. But it's still challenging. Like I think we should be honest with each other and, like, you know, share these stories too, because they're a lot more honest than just being like, oh yeah, you just do this and you're going to feel great and everything's going to run smoothly. It doesn't work that way. You kind of earn your way back out of that hole, I think, into a different path. And yeah.
Uh, I had no idea, Tara, that you had gone through a similar metabolic crash as I had and as Susie had, and that it just sounds like we've been on like a super similar trajectory with that. So I think, you know, we said at the beginning that we'd have the conversation, then decide what we wanted to talk about for a Patreon bonus. I think let's continue this on Patreon. I especially have some more thoughts on chronic disease stuff, infections, and nourishment, and it's sort of just the like massive trend train that a lot of us women have been on over the last few decades of social media becoming a thing and influence becoming a thing, and just realizing recently how deeply influenceable we all are. But for now, I want to pivot back to your life, your book, your family, your daughters, and specifically your youngest daughter, Mila's life and death. Radiance of the ordinary. That's such a beautiful phrase. What does that mean to you, and how what has your journey been of coming to decide to share Mila's story with the world through a book?
Mm. Well, um, so there's actually a story behind Radiance of the Ordinary, but I write about it in the book, so I'll leave it there. But I'll just say how it acts as a guide for me is I think for myself, it's in the ability to witness and to radiate, to find the radiance in the most simple of things. Um, you know, we have a choice like in every moment to just like sit down and be just allow ourselves to be gobsmacked by such a simple thing. Even the way just the person that loves you touches you, or just to stop yourself and let someone like look at their eyes as they're like looking at you. Like even as I'm looking at you right now, you have like this beautiful face and such kind eyes, and I just like I can let myself fall into that, and then I get tingles like because I've allowed myself to just be here and to absorb that for the gift that it is. And I everything is so confusing and everything is challenging in this world right now. It's so fast. And for me, and I think, you alluded earlier to like the engagement on my Substack. And I don't think I'm a profoundly gifted writer, but I do think I'm a storyteller. And I've always been like that ever since I was young. I've loved sharing stories and hearing stories. And it's such a beautiful way to love people, and to be allow people to love you is to just hear their stories and honor them as the gifts that they are, and it connects us in really meaningful ways. And I think, I just I think that resonates with people, and I think that it's something we're all sort of like in our day to day, just being able to find those little treasures and to just sit with them. And it it connects you to something that's meaningful in life. Even honestly, even just meditating on a leaf, it doesn't have to be anything grand. In fact, it shouldn't be anything grand. It should just be the simple things that we just walk past and don't even regard in our day-to-day life because we're so busy. And so I guess that's what the book is about. I do speak of Mila and of Mila's death. I think in the future I will write about her specifically, because a book just about her, because she was a really beautiful writer. And I'm trying to still make sense of her death. Um, Not that there's sense to be made, but I'm still cobbling together all of the things that she left us before she died. There's a great mystery and something much bigger around her death than I have been able to comprehend. And I think I need to be able to write about it to find out what that is. So um, I guess this book is like just about those little things that I find in the day of visit with a frog and what the frog brought to me, or talking about my marriage and how long we've been together, and just how the dance that we share together, just the simple dance, and how it's the great joy in my life. And just, I guess, hopefully, a way of illuminating things that we can all illuminate if we want to, and that, it brings joy into our lives. And in order to experience that joy, we have to be willing to be washed away by the grief. And to enjoy pleasure, we have to be able to toil. And we have such a sickness in this culture where we want to cut off the hard parts and just revel in the superficial gloss. And it's such a dastardly lie to tell people that they can live their lives that way, because it cuts us off from everything that's genuine and everything that can like profoundly have meaning and touch us and shape us and evolve us. Um, And so I guess that's what I'm trying to express in the book, is just living within the gifts of the dualities of life, even when they're um, just gutting and so, painful beyond anything you would ever think yourself capable of enduring. And even then, even then, um, there is no limit to what we are capable of enduring if we understand that there's meaning behind it. If we can understand that there's meaning and that there's no frivolity to our pain or to grief or to the things that we're here to learn and to then share with other people. That's how I see it anyway.
You put things so beautifully, and I'm just coming back to that word sinew because it's what's beneath the surface, and it's an organic living tissue, and it's covered in blood. it's
Mm-hmm.
not it's not clean or sanitized or pretty, but it's what connects things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you would you please honor us by telling us about Mila?
Mm-hmm. Mila, she was my third daughter, the baby. She came into this world at 10 pounds, 6 ounces, my little Christmas turkey. um, she was always an incredibly empathic, introspective, solemn but silly little girl. She was always watching other people and really admired her sisters. She was homeschooled up until grade 8. She um, loved to work with us on our farm. She loved cats. We used to call her our herder of cats because everywhere she went to, this cloud of barn cats would be wrapped around her legs following her. She had really powerful connection to the earth and to deeper meanings in life well beyond her years. I was always watching her in ways, and she would experience things. And I was always, I mean, every mother thinks their children are these wonderful mystical creatures, and I guess they are. Well, maybe not every mother thinks that, but I did. But Mila was something always stood her a little apart from other people. Um, when we would harvest animals on the farm, she wanted to be there with us, even as a child. And I have this one picture of her, and she had this goat, this little beautiful goat, and the goat was hers. And when the goat was 2 or 3 years old, it got an injury on one of its legs, and we did everything to try and help this goat, and it just didn't heal properly, and the goat was always limping and seemed to be in pain. And we said, Mila, the proper thing to do is to kill the goat. And she was crying and very upset about it and talked to us about it. And that next day she said, I think today is the day that we have to kill the goat. Um, and she said, but I want to go be with her first. And she went and got her goat, and she sat in the middle of the field, and the goat lied on her, and she was petting the goat and talking to her for well over an hour. And I remember, just as a mom, I took a picture of her out in the field, and it was just she knew that, and she agreed that it was the right thing to do, but she would never say, no, you can't kill the goat, because to her, the most important thing was that the goat was not in pain anymore, not that she was in pain because the goat would be killed. And she spent an hour there, maybe, with her goat, and then she stood up and she said, okay, Dad, you can kill her now. She knows. She knows that I'm not mad at her. She knows what she knew what she needed to know, and she was 8 years old. Like, you know, she just and she was she was always like that. She was a hockey player. She played on the boys team and they called her Bulldozer. She played rugby and she was steamroller, and she was really athletic and powerful. And in grade 8, she said she wanted to go to school. She had been homeschooled. And so she went to school. And we live in the country, so it was a rural school that she ended up in for high school. And um, she was an honor roll student. She was a peer tutor. I mean, I could go on with her accolades. She was in, absolutely, her marks were, she got like 98% in the highest levels of math. She was just a brilliant mind. Absolutely loved her dad. They were just best buds. And um, mm, just the most trustworthy kid. She drove her farm truck to school. She was like salt of the earth, really down to earth, and didn't care about brand name this, brand name that. She met a boy and started dating him when she was 16 because they weren't allowed to date till they were 16. And in her grade 12 year, COVID hit and their school closed down. There was no school. And then there was a week of school, and then there was no school, and just that whole saga. She was supposed to be going to university to be a midwife, but she found out she was going to have to be vaccinated for COVID. She wouldn't be. So suddenly her plans were out the window. She was graduating that year, and in October, we didn't know this, but she tried marijuana for the first time. And to be honest, Amber, if I did know, I probably wouldn't have thought much of it. Our other daughters tried marijuana. I tried marijuana. Like I really probably wouldn't have been worried about it. Because I didn't know then what I know now. But she left her diaries when she died. And so this is how we've been able to piece everything that happened in hindsight. But she tried it for the first time in October and November. And by December, she was writing in her diary that she couldn't sleep without smoking it in the middle of the night anymore. Here where we live, they can purchase these vaping pens and chewables and edibles from the First Nations Reserve, where they didn't ID them. And unfortunately, this isn't the same thing. It's not standardized, and it's actually grown illegally. And if I could get into the details of that, but just to say, after the fact, we had it tested, and it was loaded with illegal pesticides and chemicals and molds. But she was smoking these vaping pens at night within a month of first trying this stuff. That's how addictive it is. I've since learned that where what I smoked as a kid was maybe 7% THC, and this stuff is 98% THC. It's a pharmaceutical is what it is. And by February, she said she wanted to move out. She wasn't going to school. She wasn't going to university, which we didn't really care about the university part, but we were just dumbfounded about why she would want to move out. She was the easiest kid in the world, never had any issues. We never fought with her. I mean, everything. But she just started getting really moody. And I was telling myself, while she's not sleeping, she's like, Mom, I can't sleep. And I'm like, oh, you need more magnesium. I'll give you magnesium. Like I was completely clueless. And I should say, my first daughter was a hellion on wheels. And I was not clueless. I'm not a clueless mother. I'm not, oh, my children are perfect. It's just, I just didn't have any reason to be concerned. And she was fantastic at hiding what was going on. And these vaping pens have no smell. That's the other thing. Like she was in the room next to us upstairs smoking this stuff at night, and we had no idea. And we She ended up moving out. It was a real, we were very upset. Everyone was crying. Her sisters were crying and saying, "What are you doing? What's going on?" She didn't even tell her sisters who she loved. She, would have been ashamed, I think, to admit that there was a problem. She went to her school counselor and told him that she was seeing things and hearing things. She was having hallucinations, which I now understand is THC-induced psychosis. It's growing rapidly amongst teenagers. It's terrifying how quickly it's growing. It can also, and often is the precursor to lifelong schizophrenia. Um, the school counselor, because their program is to make friends and talk about drug mitigation instead of cessation, didn't say anything, didn't report it. It was a medical emergency. She should have been seen in an emergency room. He didn't report it. He didn't say anything. She was, in her diary, she writes of all the things she's hallucinating and hearing, and it's terrifying. She thinks people are following her. She's hiding in the closet. Some of her friends said after she died, they said to us, your daughter could see ghosts. She was talking to ghosts all the time. Your house is haunted. And I said, my house is not haunted. And she was having hallucinations. And they were like, yeah, like pot can give you hallucinations. Like they didn't know. And she had moved out, and 3 weeks later, she killed herself. Um, she, we got a knock on the door at like 3 a.m. from policemen. And they said, "Are you the parents of Mila?" And then they told us that it was reported that a woman was screaming, and they found her car with the door open, and they didn't know where she was. And it was so impossible that she had killed herself. She was not depressed. She didn't have any sort of mental illness. That I was sure someone had kidnapped her and murdered her or raped her or had her. And they called out dogs and they called out helicopters. And my husband and I were blocked in our driveway from the police. They wouldn't let us leave. And from that time until 11 in the morning, the next morning, we had no idea where she was. We were just like desperate, throwing up, crying. And then they came to the door and their hats were under their arms. And I remember Amber just telling them to put their fucking hats back on their heads. Mhm. She just walked into a frozen lake and killed herself. Swam until she couldn't swim anymore. It's still like someone else is telling that story. Yeah. So, she left a letter on her car windshield before she went into the lake. And it was apologizing to the people that would find her. And she just said, "I can't be in this fucked up mind anymore." She was so addicted. She was just so possessed. Her mind was so possessed. It wasn't, sometimes my husband and I talk about it, and I say, um, when someone murders someone, like, there's like manslaughter and there's murder, but when someone takes their own life, it's just suicide. And I'm like, who killed her? Like, yes, technically it's her, but who was that her? Because I'm not a mother that lives in denial. My daughter killed herself. There's nothing to deny there. But who whose mind was that? Like, because it was just, and I've, before before she killed herself, she wrote that note, but she wrote a second one. And that second one was in her diary. It was in the last page of her diary, and she hid it in her car. And it was a letter to me, to her dad, and to each of her sisters. And in it, she wrote a little note to each of us about her favorite memory that she had with each of us. And she hid it in the spot in her car. And her sisters, when we got her car back, her oldest sister went in the car and said, I have to go get something. She just had this intuition, and she found the diary. And that diary is how I know any of this. Like, it was such a profound gift, because if I didn't know that, if we didn't find that, I would still, we would be so in the dark. What happened? Like, how could this have happened? And she found that diary, and it allowed us to be able to understand what had happened to her those last few months, how quickly it happened. And with that diary, I have her diaries from when she was a little girl. She had them all. And I just started reading through them all. And there's so many things that are so profound that I don't understand. Like, there was this one thing she wrote about when she was 7 years old, just this joyful little kid, happy little kid. And she's writing in her diary about how she met death the day before. And he came to her, and he had golden brown eyes, and he was a 17-year-old boy. And she knew that he was going to come back for her, and she didn't have to be afraid. And, you know, the boy who got her to try marijuana, she didn't want to try it at first, she wrote about in her diary, was her 17-year-old boyfriend with golden brown eyes. I mean, there's so many stories like that, Amber. I could talk to you for hours about the stories like that. And I just think there is something so profoundly outside of my grasp of understanding here. And that's why I feel like maybe there's another book that's coming about that. But I hope I didn't talk too much about Mila. I went on.
Wow, thank you so much, Tara. I feel I don't have words. It's a blessing to feel Mila's life and spirit and sensitivity
Mm,
and bravery
mm,
through what you share. Just I'm profoundly moved by it and so grateful. And the piece about cannabis, I just, from when you first shared about that, I have felt really motivated to talk about it. I
mm.
have on Instagram, and I have shared that my daughter Mila was 21, is that right?
18.
She was 18.
Yeah.
It happened in 21.
Yeah.
Okay, my oldest is 18 now, and 3 of her friends have had psychotic episodes,
Uh,
cannabis-induced psychosis. And one of them died. She ran
oh,
into the woods and was found dead a couple days later. And
oh my God.
I shared that whole story in episode 95. The title to that episode is just 5 years of medicine stories, because I didn't want to. It's really tender, right? I'm talking about the death of like a teenage girl.
Mhm.
So I didn't make the episode about that, but it is what I talked about. She was also on acid, but it was taking a bong rip that turned the acid trip from like cool
Mm,
and fun into like psychosis and hallucination.
mm,
And I think a lot of people do not understand, like what you shared, just how much higher the levels of THC are in modern cannabis. And I'm like, I'm a Northern California hippie. You know, I was
mhm,
smoking weed in the 90s as a teenager. Like you said, it was a completely different plant. And for a long time, I really bought into it's a medicine, you know. And
mhm,
I mean, maybe
mhm,
it was back then. And of course, there are medicinal uses for it. But with legalization, and then, like you're saying, with unregulated cannabis, then there's this whole extra thing of pesticides, herbicides, molds. And then the pens bring in a whole other thing of
mhm.
the heavy metals that people are
Absolutely.
consuming. And manganese madness is a real
Yeah,
thing. I'm sure
absolutely.
we can assume that contributed. And it's just an it's it's unbelievably heartbreaking, Tara, that your girl was turned into something else through these substances and through their addictive nature. And like you said, I used to say about my alcoholic father, like he's not even him anymore. It's
Mhm,
completely rewired his brain, and he is gone, and now it's just the addiction and the substance.
mhm. And I've met so many parents, Amber, like since this has happened. And there's growing sort of awareness around what we're even talking about here. This is a pharmaceutical compound at this type, at this point. And other parents whose kids have killed themselves just, as their parents watch this descent into madness, like just, and people are so oblivious. So our country legalized marijuana a few years ago. It's legal in the whole country. And part of that deal was that they were going to do some education with youth around, we've all probably heard by this point that under the age of 25, then the developing brain, it's especially dangerous, this stuff. And there's been no education done. And, Troy and I we're working with the coroner here in Ontario, and we're putting together some awareness stuff. And I'm always trying to figure out like how much. I know some women who have just dedicated their lives to making this. Their mission is to get the word out, and God bless them. Like I am there to support them and to do what I can, but it can't be the sole focus of my life either. I have to. I've been trying to navigate where it feels right to be someone that speaks about this, and where I can still be in my living life with my other children. And now I have a grandchild, and they want me. They want me here, and they want me not just speaking about this. So I'm navigating that and trying to find the things that feel authentic to me. But what you said, one of the big things I've learned in these last few years is how angry closet smokers get when you start talking about stuff like this. I have been viciously attacked by people. They'll call you, dumb, whatever. They'll, haha, you're part of like, you're part of the, deep state that wants to control us all. And I'm like, a deep state? It's legal in Canada. I mean, if anything, the deep state wants you high as a kite. But, I, people are really emotionally attached to the things that they are addicted to in every realm. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. And no matter how neutrally you try and speak about it, and when you try and just stick to facts, and the fact is, I don't give a hoot what a grown adult puts in their body. I don't care. I don't care what you do. I care about these kids, and I care that they don't know, and I care that we're holding this up as like something that's just benign and is there to have a good time. That's what I care about. And so, uh, you know, but I have, um, and so that's why I'm careful about, I'm not going to get on Twitter and start making these big proclamations, because it's just looking for a fight and it's not going to be effective. But I think speaking to parents and just sharing our stories. And I think that's why I want to share that story, because I wish I had heard that story myself. Maybe I would have been a little bit more when she came back and told me that she had smoked pot this one day that she'd come back late from school. Maybe I would have been like, oh, like, where did you get it? Like, what kind of pot? Like, what are we talking? I would have had more of a conversation than the one that I did, because I'm just thinking, oh, it's, like her sisters or like me. She was honest with me about it. So, I'm not really worried. But you don't know. I mean, we just don't. I didn't know. I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it drives me crazy because where I live, it's been legalized for a while, medical legalization and then full legalization. And where I live in Nevada County, Northern California, was a huge growing area.
Mm.
From the 60s until the black market collapsed a few years ago with legalization. And so it's super normalized here. And like the parents of my teenage daughter's friends like give it to them.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, the parents like me who actually care about it are like really fighting not only the larger culture, but then our local subculture here when we try to educate our kids about it. And then we also have the dispensaries, which people have pointed out look like Apple stores, like they're
Oh, yeah.
gorgeous. Or I mean, I hate that aesthetic, but they're extremely well laid out and like a luxe shopping experience. And it's crazy. I went in there a couple times when it first opened, and I'm like, I don't know what words you guys are saying or what these products even are. Like, can I just get like a nug of weed?
Hmm.
And I can't smoke at all anymore. It's been a couple years. But when I did, like I tried a pen a few times, absolutely could not sleep, like heart racing,
Mm.
out of my mind. And then there's the hyperemesis cannabinoid syndrome that I personally know a few people who have had that, where your digestive system pretty much shuts down because the receptor cells are so worn out by like the cannabis always clicking into them, and people throw up all the time. They're not digesting well. They feel like they're in pain in their stomach. Heat is the only thing that helps. So this is how a lot of people have figured it out, is they are like, oh yeah, I need to be in the shower or have a heating pad all the time, and I
Yeah.
all the time and I can't eat. And with that, like you have to completely quit forever. And if you ever smoke or use cannabis again, even a CBD gummy, those symptoms will come back. Like these substances have profound effects on the body. They are not
Hmm.
neutral or benign.
Hmm. Yeah, my husband's a ER doctor, and he sees that all the time. The cannabis hypernemesis. And he said, what they are most upset about when they come in is I say to them, you will never be able to smoke pot again. And he said that they'll start crying, and what do you mean never? And yes, I can do it again. And 9 times out of 10, he'll see them again,
Mm.
because the same thing will happen. It takes them multiple times to finally clue in. But like, physiologically, what is happening in your body? Like, okay, you're puking and everything, but what is exactly, physiologically speaking, happening in your body that's something so profoundly like dysregulating? is going on, and a hot shower will cure it. Like it's just mind blowing to think about all the things that have to be happening in that from this drug. Like it's terrifying what what can happen there. And like for our daughter, it's hard to tease out, like when she started having hallucinations, she also lost the ability to write. So she, here's this student that had an average of 98 something, and she's writing in her diary, and it's full of spelling mistakes. It's not even on the lines. It's shaky, and she's talking about how there's ants are coming, and there's like demons that are following her, and she's hiding from them. And like, you imagine the terror of that. And it's a story that is shared with so many of these young people that end up killing themselves, is these delusions and auditory delusions. She heard an ambulance following her wherever she went. Like it's truly crazy making things. And with that comes this fixation on a solution, and the solution is death, right? That is the solution, because nobody else and nothing else can stop it. And the idea of stopping taking this drug is so out of the realm of possibility that it makes more sense in that brain on fire, that brain that is on fire. It makes more sense to just end this hell that you're stuck in. It's the hopelessness of that thought is so tragic, like so. And you get, but for the children or the young people that don't kill themselves but just live in this hell all the time with this hijacked brain is and then like I said, I have a family member whose son was a AAA hockey player, strapping young man, good looking guy, really well liked, went off to university, started smoking pot. And within 6 months, they got a call saying, "You have to come pick up your son. He got admitted to the hospital against his wishes, which is hard to do here in this country. But he had developed schizophrenia. He just snapped. He was doing all this marijuana. He snapped. He developed schizophrenia. And to this day, and it's been 15 years, he lives with his parents. They have to lock his door at night because he still threatens to kill them. He's violent. He's been arrested. He runs through the streets naked. He's gotten in fights and been imprisoned. He's gone to, he's been institutionalized. And I think there is a hell of a lot more cases than we understand, Amber, of people that are having these psychotic breaks and they are not tying it to marijuana. But especially now with this, like, this product, this THC, I think personally, I think is this isolated THC is just a drug in and of itself. I don't even think that we should be using the same word for it as what we used to understand, because it really is a misnomer. It's not the same thing at all.
No, it's not. That would be wonderful if we had a different word or term. But your point is important too, that even before, I also have a story from 15 years ago. So this is from before the THC levels were quite as high as they are now. A man in my larger acquaintance circle, although they were getting higher at that time, because over the decades, people, and I know some of these people, they've been breeding for higher and higher levels of THC.
Right.
Goes on. He was, and I don't even think this came into the trial, but I'm not sure. I was just later told by a friend that he was smoking joints like they were cigarettes during this period of his life. He was out for a walk. He was like early mid-20s, the age when schizophrenic symptoms start to show if someone has that underlying. He was out for a walk and he came upon an old man who was doing work on his property, and this guy snapped. He thought that I think it was demons. He thought the guy had demons that he had to kill. He beat the old man to death with drug.
Oh my God.
Cannabis and
Oh,
psychosis. And I can't with people who try to pretend it doesn't exist. I just like it. And I want to scream it from the rooftops, of course,
mm,
as a mother with a teenage daughter and another daughter who will be coming into her teenage years soon in this town where
right.
it's totally normal, dude. It's medicine.
Hmm.
But I think that you choosing to share Mila's story really opened a lot of people's eyes to this. And I'm so grateful for you doing
Mm, thank you so much. I That's all I want to be able to do, you know. It's Mila's life is not the story of like her death by like THC or even her death by suicide, because that actually isn't she, her story is so much more beautiful and profound than that, but it is a part of it. And she is a year before she died, she was doing a creative writing class, and one of the things she had to do was write a biography and write about who she wanted to be. And she didn't write about herself at all. I was really surprised when I opened it up and I started reading it. And it was actually a real story about her and her dad. And they had been driving home from the city and they summited this part on the highway, and there was a deer in the middle of the highway, and she had been hit by a car and her two front legs were severed at the knee. And so she was covered in blood and standing up on the bone of her knee and dragging like the sinew of her back legs, and cars were driving around her and just speeding by. um, my husband pulled over and the two of them got out, and cars were whipping past them, and they dragged the deer, they carried it over to the side of the road. And at that time, another man had pulled over on the other side of the highway, and he had a teenage son with him, and he came over, and the deer was just an absolute mess. And there was other deer in the grass over the fence of the highway, all watching. And my daughter wrote about it so beautifully, and she talked about how she was so heartbroken by all the cars, including the car that actually hit the deer, that just left it, and watched as it struggled to stand up on its good rear legs, but its bone tried to walk. And my husband always has a knife on him, and she held the deer's head while he quickly cut its throat and put it out of its misery. And the other man and his son helped hold the deer as well. And they said a little prayer for the deer, and they got back in the car. And her whole biography was that story. And at the end, she said, "That's who I want to be, the person that stops for the deer and does the hard thing." And that really was who she was. It was who she was. And she had such admiration for her dad. And I just thought, what 16-year-old girl writes a story like that about? uh, but anyway, those are the stories that maybe one day I'll get to write about a little bit more. But yeah, that was who she was. And so it's always a balance too. I always I want to share because I know she would have wanted me to share. And she was a teacher and she was a strong leader. But I also want um, those beautiful little bits of her to be known too, because she really mattered and she really contributed to this world, and she was a thing of beauty, and added beauty to this world. And I don't ever want that to be dwarfed by the last few months. And she wasn't a tragedy. She wasn't a tragedy. She had a beautiful, beautiful life, and she was a beautiful soul. And that's important for people to know too, I think. As her mama, I think so.
Yeah, how lucky are you to have those writings? That's such a gift. And I just think you share her being, her spirit so beautifully. I wish I had known her, and I feel like I do in a way. And
Thank you, Amber.
I hope you write that book because I'm sure the the sinews that bind are abundant in
Mhm.
in your love for her and her story of life.
Thanks, Amber.
Thank you, Tara. I'm deeply moved. Um, and I mean, I've carried Mila in my heart since I first read your words about her. I mean, shock. I just remember the shock, and wondering, of course, how could this happen? This beautiful young woman came from such a loving family and grew up on a farm and ate good food, and this
Mm,
is like the kind
I
of
know.
thing you expect. And yeah, just thank you.
Yeah.
So let's move over to Patreon and talk a little bit more about health, metabolic health for women, and nourishment, and chronic illness and infections. And we'll put the link because it's pre-order time right now for the book, right?
It's pre-order time. Yeah, it won't be out till I think September 2nd, I think, or 8th. I should know that, but September. Yeah. So they're doing pre-orders now. So if anyone is interested, pre-orders are always that crazy, weird marketing thing. It makes a difference in how many books the book sellers will be able to sell later. So it does get more eyeballs on the book from people that maybe have never heard of me and stuff. So it's always helpful, but I'm grateful for any sort of support that people, if they're interested, would give. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put that link. I will certainly be pre-ordering, and hopefully we can have another conversation then once I've read the book.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Okay. Thank you, Tara.
You're welcome, Amber. I hope I didn't go on too much. Yeah. I do tend to rattle on sometimes.
I could have kept listening forever, and I'm willing to bet that my audience will feel the same way.
Thank you.
I'm going to read you a paragraph from this Tablet Magazine article online, which will be linked in the show notes. If you've ever smoked a bowl and become irrationally anxious that everyone is staring at you, that happened to me every time I ever smoked weed in my life. I learned to only do it alone and don't do it at all anymore. Everyone is staring at you and knows you're high. What you experienced was a mild symptom of cannabis-induced psychosis. According to one study, about 40% of people react this way. If you experience that paranoia and keep smoking on a regular basis nonetheless, especially with today's high-potency THC products, and especially if you're young, there's a good chance you'll eventually suffer a full psychotic break. 35% of young people who experience psychotic symptoms, according to another study, eventually have such an episode. Of course, all the studies are linked here. If you keep using after that, you run a decent risk of ending up permanently schizophrenic or bipolar. Cannabis has by far the highest conversion rate to schizophrenia of any substance, higher than meth, higher than opioids, higher than LSD. 2 Danish studies, as well as a massive study from Finland, put the chances at close to 50%. That's crazy. My friend in high school, so this was in 97, she was diagnosed with bipolar soon after her psychotic break that happened on Halloween night, smoking weed. And, it's still something she deals with to this day. We're 44 now. And I recently read the book Hidden Valley Road. And there's a docu-series as well called Six Schizophrenic Brothers. It's about a family of 12 kids. There were 10 boys and then 2 girls born, and 6 of the brothers were diagnosed schizophrenic in their young adulthood. And what they briefly touch on in the book, go into a little bit more in the docuseries, is that they were all smoking weed. It was the late 60s, early 70s. And so, it really exacerbates something that is underlying in some people, but not all people. It's not going to happen to everyone, of course, but the super high potency THC is doing something brand new in people's brains. Pretty much every paragraph of this article is as interesting and mind-blowing to me as the one I just read you. I had a hard time picking the one I wanted to read. You know what I'm remembering right now too is my mom in the 60s. So she was not a weed smoker, even though she was a hippie in the Bay Area in the late 1960s and was going to like the shows and the acid tests, and drugs were really around. I remember she had this story. I'm just remembering this right now, reading this first sentence: if you've ever smoked a bowl and become irrationally anxious that everyone is staring at you and knows you're high. That she had smoked some pot, smoked some grass, and it was at like an acid test or a similar type gathering, with like a light show and darkness and like loud music. And actually the song that was playing was Inagata Devita, which you have to go listen to right now if you don't know Inagata Devita. I think I remember she said it was the long version. There's like a condensed radio version, but it's a long song. And it's a heavy, trippy, psychedelic song. And that she was like paranoid out of her mind listening to that song at this light show full of people on drugs. And so I think of that now when I read this, and how I always got, I guess paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. It was like, I felt very porous and sensitive. And I just learned pretty young that I absolutely could not smoke weed around other people. It became a very solo thing for me. And then at some point I just had to phase it out completely. And again, if you would like to listen to episode 95, I talk a little more about the other story in my hometown with the, my daughter's friend who was 16 at the time dying a couple years ago because of taking a bong rip. It's just crazy. All right. Thanks for listening again, and patreon.com/medicine stories for more of me and Tara talking about food and metabolic health. And also it's spring, so our herbal oils will be on sale soon. I'm not sure if they will be the day this comes out, but if you're listening to this spring, check out mythicmedicine.love to see if they're on sale yet. And if not, they will be very, very soon.